Hi, everyone. Welcome to the EladPod. We've got a very exciting and important episode on Amendment 3 and Clean Missouri. Amendment 3 will be on the ballot on November 3rd, or if you're voting earlier, will be on there too. And there's been a whole lot of talk about it, so we're going to get right to the details with all of you. We'll be here to answer all of your questions with Soendker Nicholson, who is the campaign director for Clean Missouri and for the No on Amendment 3 campaign as well. So if you're watching right now, you'll be able to comment any of your questions. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. You can also put your questions there too. We'll be able to see those live wherever you're watching from and get those questions answered. You'll also see a phone number on your screen, which you'll be able to text in your questions to as well. While you're waiting for us to get started, please, if you could, share the video wherever you're watching it from. You can retweet it on Twitter. You can share it on Facebook. Put the link out there, whatever you are doing. Let more folks know so that we can have a bigger conversation and get more folks informed about what will be on the ballot this November. We'll be on in just a bit. Stick with us, and we'll see you in just a couple minutes. Share it while you're waiting. All right, folks, welcome to the EladPod. So excited to have you. My name is Elad Gross, the host of the EladPod. I'm a constitutional and civil rights attorney here in Missouri, and today we're going to be talking about Amendment 3, which is on the ballot in November. We've got a wonderful guest, the director of the Clean Missouri campaign and the campaign to vote no on Amendment 3. And we'll make sure that Sean is with us right now. While you're watching, go ahead and comment. Let us know where you're watching from so we can see where you are and who you are. And if you've got any questions as we're talking, go ahead and put those in the comments too. We'll be able to see those and get those answered live. The whole idea behind this is to make sure that our government is responsive to all of us. And so we're trying to answer as many questions as we can and to inform as many people as well. So while you are watching, you can go ahead and share the video too, wherever you're watching from. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you're on, please share so we can get more folks involved in this conversation too. And it's an important one. On the screen, during most of the show, you'll actually see a phone number. If you don't want to put all your information out there, that's fine. So you can text that phone number. Don't call it, text it, because I'll be able to see your questions right there too. And we'll be able to get those answered as well. So let me bring on Sean, make sure that we still got him. Sean, are you there?
I am, yeah. Thanks a lot. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Welcome. Well, welcome to the EladPod. Very excited to have you to talk about one of the hottest topics in Missouri right now, which is voting. And voting is very important. And Amendment 3 is going to be on the ballot and something that all of us are going to be voting on, and I know that you've been very
Yep.
involved in this process for years now. So if you could you introduce yourself to everybody, tell us what you do, and what your involvement is with Amendment 3?
Yeah, so my name is Sean. I live in Kansas City now. I grew up in Northeast Missouri in Palmyra. Went to Mizzou. I actually was living in Columbia back when we started this campaign to pass the Clean Missouri Amendment, back in 2016, 2017. Um, we, in 2017, 2018, many of your viewers, listeners may have been a part of that campaign, may have remembered it. We put a nonpartisan redistricting reform measure on the ballot in 2018. There were several parts of that measure, all of which were about making our state legislature more responsive to its people, less reliant on, less manipulative, less able to be manipulated by partisan special interests. So we passed the Clean Missouri Amendment by a big 2-to-1 margin, almost 2-to-1 margin in 2018. And then immediately after the vote in 2018, politicians, lobbyists in Jeff City got to work trying to figure out how they could undo those reforms passed by voters. We were successful in defeating what they wanted to put on the ballot last year. We slowed it down this year. They ended up smashing it through in the middle of the pandemic, when the Capitol was semi-closed, mostly closed, and now it's on all of our ballots right now in the form of Amendment 3. So we have been working all these years to build a legitimately transpartisan organization that is working to make sure that our state legislature is responsive to its people. The coalition that we have this year in 2020 is even bigger than the one we had in 2018 because of that big mandate from 2018 and because the details, the fine print of Amendment 3 is so heinous, and we've been able to grow the coalition even beyond what it was before.
Yeah. I've got a question, but before I do,
Yep.
What's with all the guitars, man?
So
They're great.
This is the basement. Thank you. Yeah. So this is the basement. Normally I'd be in an actual office, but this is what campaigners looks like. You can see the lit piles down here. So we did. Yes, campaigning from the basement for real. The team, we're all working remotely, so it's been a unique challenge in 2020 to be able to do this.
Yeah, and I mean, that must be such an interesting perspective because, I mean, obviously you were very involved with Clean Missouri, and this has been a multi-year process now because there's the attack on it, which is Amendment 3. But, I mean, what kind of, just from a communication standpoint, trying to get the word out to folks, what have you seen? I guess what have been the big changes now that you are working remotely? You're not in the offices. We've got this whole pandemic going on. What have been the big changes or adaptations that you've had to make as a result of that?
Yeah, so the biggest change has been in, pre-field part of a campaign. Normally we'd be on the road all the time doing presentations and meetings, talking to anyone who would listen. That's how we were able to build the coalition in 2017 to 2018, a lot of time on the road, which you understand well. And then it was a gajillion Zoom meetings instead with no time on the road throughout the summer, throughout the spring. I wasn't totally sure how canvassing was going to look. There's been more actual direct voter contact and conversations than I feared we'd be able to have. A few months ago, there are partners in the larger coalition that are actually doing low contact, safe, social distance canvassing. There's been a lot more lit drops this year than we otherwise might do, just because people have to stay safe, both the workers, and you're trying to not create a situation for voters. We've had way more phone conversations in 2020 than we did back in 2018, just because that's the best way to be talking to voters.
Yeah. I mean, even stuff like this that we're doing right now, I mean, there's so many more of these Zoom calls and online things, but I mean, I don't know. I found it to be a good way to still connect with folks and to get the word out, and having you on is great. We actually do have folks who are watching from all over the state now. Lucas and Tom, I see both of you. Thanks for saying hi. But I mean, it's a good way to, I think, interact with folks, and also at least some of the platforms, it's a good way to engage maybe groups of folks who haven't been as involved before, haven't been paying as much attention before. So tell us, why have you been doing all of this? Like, what what is the idea? Like, why is this important? Why should we care about the Clean Missouri, really the movement now, and this Amendment 3 that's trying to reverse it?
Yeah, so I mean, I got started doing in politics, doing other kinds of advocacy work, and it was very clear on a whole host of issues, like whether it's payday lending or raising the minimum wage or healthcare or any number of issues that folks might be working on, that the incentive structure that informs how our legislators make choices or don't make choices is really, really important. And it's boring. Those rules can be arcane at times, just of like how systems get built, how structures work. But we have been living in Missouri for too long now, through the aughts, through the teens, 2010s, with too many legislators not really worried about folks back home. Our old redistricting system back from 2001, 2011 was really defined by maps, lines getting drawn in secret, and the ultimate outcome. There's different ways that those maps got to that outcome, but the ultimate outcome was largely incumbent protection districts, where very little competition in November. Half of our state legislative races in the past few cycles have been completely uncontested by both political parties. So you've got super duper Democratic seats and super duper Republican seats, and not a whole lot up for grabs in the middle. And that's just like not a good way to have government. There should be a healthy amount of anxiety on the part of our elected officials about are they going to get rehired? And it should not just be worrying about a few big donors and just the political primary voters in every district. So certainly with Clean Missouri reforms, like there's still going to be Democratic seats and there's still going to be Republican seats, districts that lean those ways. But we all do better when our state legislature reflects the will of the voters, and voters are able to make changes if they want, or they can re-up the people in office if that's what they want. But we all do better when our legislature is responsive to all of us.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I should make this disclosure too to everybody who's out there watching, because I like to bring on folks with different perspectives, and we might not always agree, whatever it might be. I think Amendment 3 is a dumpster fire, and so I very much agree with you, and I'm very happy to have you on. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and I guess for you, what have you seen? I know this is another example in Missouri of something we just voted on, and then the legislature not liking how we, the people, voted, even though it was overwhelming, and then throwing it back to us. Could you talk a little bit about, I know you mentioned it a little bit, about how the legislature has proposed this one, but could you talk about the different ways that Clean Missouri in 2018 got on the ballot versus how Amendment 3 this time got on the ballot?
So the Clean Missouri Amendment got on the ballot and passed because voters worked for 18 months, certainly more than a year, collecting signatures in every part of the state. We turned in 340,000 signatures back in May of 2018. During that signature collection time, we built a coalition of Republicans and independents and Democrats all coming together to say, hey, there's a better way that we can have state government work. So we put it on the ballot, and then we had to keep campaigning after we turned in the signatures, because the thing about ballot campaigns is that if voters are confused, if they don't understand, if they feel like someone's trying to trick them, voters are going to reject that measure. And so we kept campaigning, we kept building our coalition, and then in November 18, we won big. One of the things I think about a lot from that 2018 campaign is how I would go line by line, section by section with whether it would be reporters. There was a Republican senator that I would call, or he would call me. He would be going back and forth through to Jeff City, on Mondays and Thursdays, or Mondays and Fridays. And we would go section by section, and there would be a whole lot of devil's advocate and like, why is this, why is that? And because we did that process, because we worked and crafted really good policy, and because we were able to defend the policy piece by piece, that's how we were able to build the trust and earn the votes to win so big. What the politicians have done is smash through a nasty, complicated, flawed proposal with very little care for like the details and make sure that things happen like they should. They smashed it through in the middle of a pandemic when there are a whole lot of other things that the voters wish they would be working on. And you will have noticed, I mean, if you've been paying attention, that there's very few folks out there actually trying to defend this thing because it's so indefensible. It's also worth noting that they know that voters are not going to like what's in the fine print, and so they're trying to trick voters with a $5 change to lobbyist gift rules. So everything in Amendment 3 is about gerrymandering, is about rigging the system to protect incumbents, except for a $5 change to lobbyist gifts and a $100 change to campaign contribution limits. That is the tell that they are trying to do something sneaky and nasty, and that's not actually about helping their voters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So clean Missouri. Talking about the $5 and the $100 that they've changed here. When you see on the, you go to your ballot, you're going to see Amendment 3, and then you're going to see a summary on your ballot. It's not the entire language of the law, which is very extensive. Amendment 1, which is interesting, Amendment 1, which will be on the ballot, that has to deal with term limits. Actually, there's about as many words on there as are actually in the proposed changes, but that's not the case for Amendment 3 at all. It's very long, and it includes things in there that weren't initially included, and so it had to go to court to get this thing on the ballot the right way, at least to some degree. I mean, some of us still disagree that this is the appropriate language for it. But the first 2 points there, one of them is, hey, let's eliminate these lobbyist gifts, right, which are currently limited to $5. And that was a limit that was put in by Clean Missouri, right?
Right. That's right.
So tell me, okay, so I hate lobbyists, right? I don't like lobbyists. We don't want those at all. Why, when Clean Missouri started, $5 isn't that much. Whether you hate them or you love them, I mean, it doesn't really, it's not very much. But I guess, from Clean Missouri, the standpoint there where you limited what were lobbyist gifts before that? What did they look like before they were limited down to the $5 amount?
So there were no limits of any kind when we were collecting signatures. There were no limits, even on election day. So the year that we started collecting signatures, there were more than $1 million in lobbyist gifts that were reported going to the state legislature that year. And we lowered it to $5. I think, we have certainly heard opponents, or I guess they're supporters of the gerrymandering plan, try to, make an apples to apples comparison, but they really just aren't. Between what was passed in 2018 and this one. So a few of the notable differences. One, the redistricting changes were the first bullet on every single petition, on every single ballot. We defended aggressively built bipartisan coalition. In fact, we had the Republican support that we had for the Clean Missouri Amendment came from the redistricting provisions, not from some of the money and politics pieces. And so, in addition to the lobbyist gift changes and the redistricting reforms, we also made sure that the legislature needed to start following the Sunshine Law, which the law already said they're supposed to, but then they kind of weaseled their way out of doing, or at least it was applied in very inconsistent ways. So there were certainly different pieces to the Clean Missouri Amendment, but those were all done well, and we defended each one of them piece by piece, conversation by conversation, voter by voter. When voters go in to vote on Amendment 3 this year, you're totally right. Like the first bullet is gonna look attractive, but the fact is that it's just a $5 change with loopholes. The second bullet is gonna look like it's campaign finance reform perhaps, but it's a $100 change to campaign contribution limits for state Senate candidates only. A whopping change from $2,500 to $2,400. One of the crazy things we found in talking to voters is just sharing those two facts, like that people's spidey senses go off with just that. Like they may not understand, or they may not want to have a conversation about redistricting, but they know that if politicians are trying to turn over what voters did and they're trying to trick you with a $5 change, like something else is going on. And it's that third bullet, of course, which is what everyone knows that this is really about. And it's about making the system more partisan, making it more secretive, and having a whole lot of rules in the fine print that would allow them to create these politician protection maps.
Yeah.
One thing that voters should also know that we'll get into is the fiscal note that appears right after bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3 talks about local governments they are expecting significant revenue losses if this thing passed. And I know you've talked a lot about this online of just what a radical change it would be if Amendment 3 is enacted as the sponsors intend and kids don't count anymore. Our communities aren't fully represented, fully counted. I mean, it's really a rather radical set of details in the fine print.
Right. Actually, that's one of the questions that I've got queued up too. So,
jump ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, please. This is great. When things flow together, it's a little bit of a better time. So, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. If you continue reading past those 2 bullet points, all of a sudden things start to fall apart in terms of how attractive Amendment 3 looks. Right? So, this was. And, there have been changes in different states looking at the redistricting process. And, we hear the term gerrymandering a lot. And that might be something that, some folks heard in their history class a long time ago. And, maybe they've seen come up a few times in some, negative ads on TV about how someone's drawing their own district. But the thing is, like, that's actually happening. Like, that's a very big issue in America right now that's being litigated quite a bit. Around how districts are drawn. And there's different perspectives on how they should be drawn. I guess in Missouri, clean Missouri, what we voted on, that was and that was bullet point number 1 was about redistricting changes and how that was going to happen. I guess could you describe or just explain, like, why do you think that the clean Missouri way of doing these districts, of drawing out how we're represented really in our state legislature, why do you think that is better than what we had before? And then we can talk about the mess that Amendment 3 is, because it's not. I mean, as for everybody who says it's a reversal, it's not. It is not a reversal. It does eliminate a whole bunch of stuff that we just changed, but it adds some things in there that are just, in my view, totally destructive, and we're definitely going to talk about that a lot too. But just explain, like, what is the idea behind these reforms in Missouri that even gave Clean Missouri room to exist?
So every state does a little bit different, but the core features of any good fair map plan are you've got to have a process that has some independence to it. You got to have transparency to understand why the maps are created like they were, why lines got drawn, where they got drawn. And then you have to have rules that protect voters. Because, to your point, gerrymandering is a not great American tradition, but it is an American tradition. And politicians, lobbyists, operatives left to their own devices, if you go let them draw lines in the back rooms, they're going to draw lines to protect their friends, not their voters. The technology for being able to draw maps, draw lines is more sophisticated by the year. I think folks who have been watching this process in the past are going to be amazed in really great ways by how technology has come and how much more democratized it's going to be in 2021 in Missouri and everywhere else. Because it used to be everything got drawn like in a basement or in a back room where like you're drawing wax crayon on a map or pen on a map or something like that. And then in 2001, 2011, it was super expensive and sophisticated software, but it was software that cost so much, was hard enough to get, and you had to have like data files to be able to use that very specialized software, that it was just not something that everybody can do. And there's been a lot of work that's been done in the last decade so that everybody can be a part of that process. That technology can be used for good and evil. And if there aren't rules to protect voters and to protect communities, then all sorts of hinky business can happen with that software to draw lines to protect a particular incumbent or get an outcome that you want, to break up voting coalitions of people you don't like or other coalitions that you wish didn't have power. So all sorts of bad things can happen. And so what voters did, Missouri has had commissions for a while drawing lines, but unlike other states that have legitimately independent commissions, we have dependent partisan commissions where the nominees have traditionally been lobbyists and political insiders, former politicians, lawyers to big donors, things like that. Like that's who gets picked to go draw the lines, and they have clear agendas, either partisan or parochial or whatever it is that they're trying to get accomplished and why they got picked in the first place. So what voters did is we added some independence to that process. So there's now the role of the independent state demographer that goes first in the process, draws draft plans, underlined draft plans, turns over all the data that's used for those drafts, and then provides them to the commissions. So those commissions were not modified by the Clean Missouri Amendment, but those still exist. They can make changes. They'll have hearings. If they can reach consensus, that they'll make changes, and if they want to do that. So the process changed a little bit, got more transparent, had some independence. But then the big thing in my mind, like the most important thing, is that there are now rules in the Constitution that protect communities, that ensure that the overall outcome is fair, and that also encourage competition. So back to our earlier part of the conversation about like competition helping get better outcomes for the people. There will be more competitive seats in 2021, 2022 after these lines get drawn, because that's what voters wanted, and that's how we get to a good and healthy democracy. So all of those pieces work together. And then the rules in our Constitution now, they all fit together, but there is like a priority ranking so that when map drawers have to like make choices, or someone goes to challenge a plan in court, there's clear guidance for like, hey, this is how we know that the right outcome has happened, or the courts, if something doesn't go as it should, and the litigant is able to successfully show that, hey, here's a better way to have a more fair map, then that can be the outcome as well. So the first rule is to protect the voting power of communities of color. That is a stronger legal standard than existed before the Clean Missouri Amendment passed. That was super important to be first, because both Democrats and Republicans have done bad things in the past to weaken the political power of Black Americans and other voters of color. And so that's super important. After that come rules that require the overall state plan to be fair to both parties. One thing that's important for everyone to know is that those rules for fairness and encouraging competition apply to the whole plan. They do not prescribe the outcomes of particular districts. The supporters of Amendment 3 intentionally and dishonestly misread that particular criteria to the exclusion of everything else, and try to suggest that what that rule does is it says like every district has to have like some fantasy number, which is just not the case. We all know it's not the case, but like their campaign, of course, is not built on honesty. So those rules for protecting communities, for partisan fairness, they also then exist with the current and ongoing rules that every district has to be compact. And then there's rules that say follow local political boundaries to keep communities together. So they all work together, they all fit together, and that's why the Clean Missouri Amendment was endorsed and supported by every anti-gerrymandering organization that exists. And we'll get into why that those people and more say that Amendment 3 is a disaster, but the policy was strong and it was well vetted, and that's why it won big.
Yeah, it's okay, so there's it can be complicated. I mean, it's not too complicated if you actually just like sit back and think about it. Like right now, Clean Missouri, the way it changed it was now we've got a professional map maker who makes the map, the draft, and then the draft goes to the same group of folks who would have started the process beforehand anyway, right? The commission that's really picked on a partisan basis. And then that commission, if they want, they can make changes to that map. Like they don't have to accept this professional one. But beforehand, it starts with the political side. And then when they can't agree on anything, which happens quite often now, but when they can't go, then it goes to a group of judges. And the judges, they don't draw maps for a living. They make decisions, and they're lawyers. And I'm a lawyer. I can't make a map. I mean, I used to love drawing maps when I was a kid, actually, now that I think about it. But no, I mean, that's not my job. It's interesting because, one of the things, I guess it's like the most attractive concept is when you think about, oh, well, if the maps are unfair, which I think a lot of folks agree on both sides, really, and then everybody's going to blame each other for why it is. But if the maps are unfair, why don't we just make a program that just, does it in a bunch of squares, right? Have everything divvied up, based on population, obviously, because they're supposed to be about equal in population. But why any of this other stuff? Why don't we just start drawing, maybe little circles, and then you have them cut up in a circle, but just have it so that all the shapes basically look the same, and no one cares about whoever's living where or whatever else it is. Just divvy it up that way. Why don't we just do it that way?
So some folks have thought about that. I think that's actually a bad idea. I think one of the things that software and algorithms and all sorts of things you can do, you can have randomly generated maps. And the software has gotten to the point, and computers have gotten powerful enough that you can have tens of thousands of randomly assembled precincts, voting precincts or census blocks all put together, and you can have random maps all generated. The great thing about that kind of software is it allows you to see what an acceptable range of outcomes ought to be. Like, you can plot out of, like, okay, if we say, these are the rules that we're trying to find, you can measure, you can quantify everything from partisan fairness to how big districts are, like all that kind of stuff. So it's important to have both math, like we can quantify gerrymandering, we can quantify all of these things, but then you need to have the human element, because we as people do not live in square shape all of the time. Sometimes what matters to voters, and how a voter would define their community, or how they would, what we as normal humans think about as communities that matter, are not the same as what politicians think are communities that matter. So you need to have both. Like, you need to be able to say, okay, like, it actually makes more sense to keep this neighborhood together or keep this block together. So that discretion, all of that is important, and it's important for all those things to come together. And that's how, through a multi-step process with checks and balances and transparency, you get to the best possible outcome.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, when one of, and this is something that you highlighted already, but protecting voting power, especially when you're talking about minority groups in Missouri and really in America. I mean, that's been a struggle legally through the court system and with the Voting Rights Act and everything else that's happened. But if, and I've been doing a lot of reading on this kind of topic, but if you just start saying, hey, random computer, just tell me what my destiny is and draw these, you're exactly right, entirely ignoring the history of this country and the current segregation that still goes on because of neighborhoods that folks are living in. And you very well might take a state legislature that has some minority representation in it and entirely destroying all of the work that's gone into organizing that, to making sure that's actually happening. And you very well, John had a question that we're going to get to, but talking about potential legal challenges to all of these kinds of things. But you potentially drawing a map just randomly, very well, one, might hurt a lot of folks and their representative power in government, but two, you might very well be in violation of a lot of federal law that's resulted from a lot of the discrimination that we have seen in our electoral system. So that's definitely a thing. So John's antsy. He's ready to go. He's got questions about where are we going to chat? How bad is this thing written? And it's interesting because you've put this video out there too, but the head of the committee from where Amendment 3 came from was readily out there saying there are errors in this thing and there's problems with what we're putting on the ballot, and we're still voting on it, and there are some significant ones. Okay, so we know that Amendment 3 would get rid of this nonpartisan map maker. It would try to go straight to these commissions again, but that's not all it's doing. What are the big changes that Amendment 3 would make, not just going back to what it was before 2018, but what differences would we see moving forward that we didn't have before 2018?
So there's three buckets of changes. There's change to the process, the how, of like who draws the maps and do we have any sort of insight into what's happening in that back room. There are the changes to the fundamental rules that govern what a fair map is and inform like just what rules have to be followed to get to a map plan. And then the third bucket of change, after you've rigged the system, you rig the rules, they want to rig the back end protections, the rights that we have, by making it harder to challenge an unfair map at all. And then they want to make it so a judge can't even throw out a redistricting plan, even if the judge finds that it's unconstitutional. So like We talked a little bit before about the $5 gift change being a tell. Mm-hmm. The fact that they're trying to make it harder to sue to fix rigged maps is the tell that they're trying to rig the maps. On the process piece, it's not even the old process that we had before. They want to make the number of folks who are in those back rooms bigger than ever. They want to make the commissions larger so they can get more of their friends stuffed into those rooms. And then they want to centralize control over who does, who gets appointed to there by giving new powers to the state political parties to be choosing folks for the House Commission that they've never had before. And all of the nonpartisan redistricting work that's happening around the country, every good plan that gets voter support makes things more transparent, more nonpartisan, more rules to protect voters. They want to go the exact opposite direction on all of those things. One thing we haven't talked about a ton yet is just how the rules themselves get changed. So they want to change who counts and who matters in our maps. That is a radical revolutionary change. Every state in America counts everyone in their maps. Missouri has counted everyone since at least 1875, and they have been clear that they want to draw maps based on the eligible voter population of the state, not the total population. So that is a huge BFD radical change. Even supporters of this idea have admitted that it'd be a radical way to draw maps. It may not sound like a big deal at first, but then you remember that there are 1.5 million Missourians who aren't eligible to vote. Almost all of them are kids. And so almost all the impact would be on families and communities that happen to have kids in them. 2% of our state population are non-citizen immigrants. 23% of our state population are kids 17 and under. So, some supporters of Amendment 3 have tried to say this is some sort of anti-immigration thing and played some dog whistles in that sense. But even under their own plan, the overwhelming impact is on their own families and their own communities, and because kids wouldn't count.
Yeah, it's wild, and you were on St. Louis Public Radio the other day with Senator Onder, and that was a good time. And I had a discussion with him on very civil Twitter. I thought I was being pretty civil, but his explanation, it's so interesting coming from, he's very into limited government, at least, that's the statement and everything. And, it's the side, the conservative side, limited government. And, I like the concept in general, in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to this, because what has happened is it has changed the language about who's counted. It's not the most clear thing in the world. He is saying, oh, it's so we don't count undocumented people in Missouri. That's not what the words say. I mean, you could have put that in the language. That's not what you did. You said that it's going to be based on the principle of one person, one vote. And when you think about where in the language are children protected in the count? Where in the language really anybody? You think about felony disenfranchisement. You just leave that authority up to the legislature. And in his view, he wouldn't vote to prevent kids from being counted. But we don't elect him forever, and he's got term limits, and so does everybody else. And so it's never been, and this is in Missouri's constitution. That's the reason why we all have to vote on it and make changes to it. But it's certainly. There's just the language gives so much authority to the government to decide who matters for representation that determines who is in our government. It seems very very purposefully self-serving in so many ways. Am I totally missing on that? Because I still don't understand what in the world this argument is.
Yeah, so it is intentionally confusing the way the language is crafted. They remove the current requirements that everyone counts. So that is the law right now. It's required in the Constitution 3 separate times. They intentionally, unambiguously remove all 3 requirements that you count everyone. They then remove the requirement that you have to use data from the decennial census. Why would you want to be drawing maps based on something other than the census? You'll have to ask people who support Amendment 3. But then on this standard, it says maps shall be drawn on the basis of one person, one vote. That was perhaps a little more mysterious in December of last year. But since then, the sponsor of Amendment 3 was asked directly by Jill Shoup back in January, what does this mean? How are you determining who matters and who counts in maps? The Attorney General's office was asked in August by an appellate court judge in the successful litigation to get the ballot language changed. And the judge said to the Solicitor General, what does this mean? Maps shall be drawn based on person, one vote. And in both instances, 7 months apart, in different contexts, the same question was answered the same way. We are trying to draw maps based on the eligible voter population of Missouri. So you don't have to take my word for it. We don't have to theorize about what they might be up to. They have told us what they're trying to do. And they're trying to draw maps that are based on 4.5 million Missourians, not 6.1 million Missourians.
Yeah. And nowhere in America, we don't do this. We just don't. And, you can go back, right? So, and I've obviously been going down a rabbit hole, but you go back to when the country was founded, because the census itself, and we talk about computers and the computer programs that we have now. I mean, since we started, we had the census, and there were people, and there were few of them, and initially it was the marshals that were in charge of it, and they were going around and trying to tabulate, by hand, all of this information. And I mean, obviously we've expanded the information that we gather over time, but I mean, still we were gathering quite a bit. And so the count would come out, and, the initial count that first came out was that folks in government were like, well, we think you've counted too few people. It wasn't about excluding people. It was like, we didn't get everybody. I don't know if this is correct, because we want to make sure that everybody is represented. And at the time, back in the 1790s, we were talking about fewer people who had the right to vote than do now. I mean, we were talking about women and children. And there was not a question. It's actually one of the fewest debated issues at the Constitutional Convention, was whether people who could not vote should be counted. Now, obviously, there's a very big history of slavery and racism that goes behind that too, with folks who are counted as 3/5 of a person. But still, like, people who could not vote were being counted because there was a belief that the government is still supposed to represent them, and that to some degree, there's supposed to be access to that government. Now, we've expanded upon, we've understood maybe better, would be an argument, but understood better what those principles meant, and still we're working on, that's really the history of this country, working on that. But now, I mean, it's like, for the first time in 2020 now it's all of a sudden we're supposed to stop counting people for the very basic thing that, I mean, this is, I get so frustrated thinking about it. And it's sad, because when you look at what, you say something, right? Oh, well, on principle, here's what I believe. I disagree with all of American history leading up to this point and the progress that we've made. Okay, fine, opinion. But then you look at what the results would be if you stop counting children in Missouri. And those results are certainly skewed in favor of one group versus another. Right?
So beyond just like the fundamental wrongness, unfairness of not counting everyone, and all of our communities are going to lose if we lose representation. But if you don't count kids, if you don't count everyone, the data consistently show that disproportionately impacts communities of color. And that's because Black and brown communities are on average, just younger, for a whole lot of reasons. And, if there are disparities in the health system and other, folks aren't living as long, then your average age gets to be younger. Right. And so what the data show is that if you don't count kids in the maps, the deal on the table, if this is enacted, is essentially 1 in 5 Missourians will not be counted, and then it's 1 in 4 Black Missourians, and then it's half of the Latino and Asian American populations of the state would lose representation. So this is why there has been a bigger coalition, or this is part of why there is a bigger coalition working to defeat this thing in 2020. Because of the discriminatory impacts, because of the race equity impacts, because of what it would mean for Missouri to be the first state in America to be moving in the wrong direction. This alone should sink this whole thing. But it is, again, like one of many mad things that are all part of this overall nasty Amendment 3 package.
Right. Yeah, it's mind blowing. And there's an argument out there right now that some corporate agriculture groups are making in that Amendment 3 is an attempt to preserve the rural life in Missouri. Just the understanding of that, and I got a little bit fired up on the last podcast we did, but I mean, one, just to think about rural issues in Missouri and the direction that we're going as a state is already very scary, especially given how we're giving corporate agriculture and monopolies way more power to even have a discussion about this issue. But two, I mean, if you actually look, there was a report, it was by the Brennan Center that was put out that had a lot of the statistics you talked about, and they actually have a map of areas that would gain relatively in representation and those that would lose. And there's a lot of rural areas. I'm thinking of Saline County, I'm thinking of Pettis County, I'm thinking of a lot of parts of southwest Missouri that would actually lose relative representation. One of the areas that would actually gain, Kansas City would lose a whole lot, but one of the areas that would gain would actually be St. Louis City itself. It's one of the very dark blue areas, and I'm in St. Louis City right now. We've seen a lot of issues with education, and a lot of kids have moved out, and so those areas that would actually lose representation, St. Charles, St. Louis County, but it's just. I mean, it just, there's so many arguments that folks just seem to be throwing against the wall right now as if there's no information or data behind it. That's got to be frustrating for you as someone who's running this campaign. I mean, you got to go on the radio, you got to go on all of these things because it seems like, just from an outsider looking, but it seems like most of the work that you're doing is really dispelling a bunch of crap that folks are just vomiting out of their mouths in order to preserve some system that they're benefiting from.
There is a lot of nonsense, right? The whole theory of the case on Amendment 3 is, we'll go trick people, and if we can't, then we'll just do this misinformation. But on the specific part about how, this urban-rural thing, this attempt to create division where there isn't any. I'm from a town of 3,000 people. It's not it's Palmyra would lose. If this thing passes. And all of their arguments when they talk about, stringy districts or this connected to this, it's all based in maybe it's not intentional, but it's based in a misunderstanding, a misreading of what the law actually is, of what voters passed. So you'd mentioned that the Brennan Center report, another great report for folks to check out, is one that was done by the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. Mm-hmm. They look at, analytically, from an independent perspective, all of the redistricting systems around the country, and they looked at what voters approved in 2018. What they found is that under our voter-approved rules, about 20% of the legislative districts in the next redistricting cycle, starting in 2021, will be competitive. In the past, it's been, lower than 10 for sure, 5%. It is more competition than we've had before. The rest of the districts will lean Republican, will lean Democratic, and it will all be done without crazy shaped districts because A, you don't have to, B, the Constitution requires that you have compact contiguous districts. That rule didn't go away. It is still the law. And it's because you've got communities being kept together and you have an overall outcome that's fair. That's why you've got bipartisan support for the voter approved reforms in the first place. So it's all misinformation on purpose. You're right. It is exhausting. But we do this because it matters, and it's going to be a great thing for the state to win another mandate for fair maps, because we knew it was going to be a long fight, but we are so darn close to winning a second time.
Yeah. Well, we talked about those. I don't want to forget because we are starting to run down a little bit, but. This also ties in. We talked about the fiscal note that is attached to Amendment 3, and so that's if you're reading it on the ballot, maybe even if you still have your ballot, you got to get that in soon. So please do. But if you do have it, you can look at it right now. But you'll see it soon, one way or another, if you haven't. But at the very end of it, there's a fiscal note attached to it that describes, how much this thing is estimated to cost, and it's got. An unspecified but thought to be a significant amount that's going to cost for local governments. It doesn't even tell you how much it's going to be. What's that about? What is happening there?
So that is because local leaders from across the state, academics, elected officials, business leaders, all during the public comment period that went into creating that fiscal note, they talked about, if you don't count everyone in our communities, we are going to lose out for a variety of reasons. But it essentially comes down to the research backs up common sense that if your family, if your community, if your city are not adequately counted and not adequately represented, there are downstream costs to that. You don't get your fair share of the representation. You don't get your fair share of the resources. So that part of the fiscal note directly speaks to what we've been, spending a good chunk of time on here, is this super radical idea of trying to make Missouri the first state to not count everyone in our maps.
Yeah, it's. I think actually the mayor of St. Louis City, Nicholson, wrote a letter that was just like, oh my goodness. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
This is not a great time to be doing. I don't understand. This is not a great time to be doing. Every one of us understands that this is a very difficult time, especially for local governments, especially for state governments, but here we're talking about local ones, because everybody's straining against what is happening in the economy right now. We have so many folks who are no longer even looking for jobs out there. The unemployment system is broken, the small businesses, and we're not doing very much in Missouri, unfortunately, to really deal with that. And that's all happening over here while the legislature is having us vote on something that's going to very likely have a very big impact on those governments that are suffering the most already and trying to provide services to folks. And right now, I mean, since for the last few months now, I've been working a lot on the eviction crisis in Missouri. And I mean, that thing is so real. And right now we're asking local governments to really deal with a lot of those issues and to try to find ways to help people. And here we are trying to find ways to make that even harder, as if it wasn't hard enough already. And it just blows my mind. I don't know. John had a question a little bit earlier. Oh, Michael Whittier's on here. Michael's been doing great work to get the word out about this issue to so many folks.
Michael's wonderful.
Yes, he is absolutely
we
great.
are very lucky to have Michael on the team.
Yeah, I'm just adding him to the broad. I got to put him on the screen because I just love this guy. He's just wonderful. So find Michael. He does great. He was on the podcast before. We had a good time, and we talked about a lot of issues facing Missouri in general. John has had this question. He's been sitting here for a while. Any parts of Amendment 3 that are illegal and could potentially be challenged in court if it does pass? Now, obviously, there's a very big effort to make sure it doesn't pass. And the best way to make sure that happens is to vote no on Amendment 3. And there's that little bubble that you fill in that says no right there. But let's say, goodness gracious, this thing somehow passes. Is there anything that can be, you think, in the court system be challenged?
I mean, my job is to make sure that conversation never happens. I've
good,
literally
please.
spent no time thinking about that. So I will kick that to other actual attorneys.
Yeah, well, you happen to be next to one right now, virtually at least, not in real life. We're not there. I mean, his room looks a lot nicer than mine. Although this is pretty good. This is not the worst thing in the world.
You got the flag. It's good.
I've got the flag. Yes, the flag, made in America and brought to you by the wonderful Democrats in Lincoln County, actually. So thank you guys for that. Yeah, I won that at some. It was thrown out there, and I caught it somehow. So that was great. There are going to be some significant legal issues with this, which was, and we already talked about, but in the committee before this thing got out to everybody else, I mean, they knew that there were significant legal issues with this, but we're still voting on it anyway. I think when you talk about not counting people, that's going to be something that will definitely be challenged. I think when you talk about the disparate impact that this is going to have on minority groups or on just like certain areas in the state versus other, that's going to be challenged. I think when you talk about taking away the rights of Missourians to actually challenge these things in court, that's something that also is going to be a very big issue. So I think that we use the term dumpster fire a lot. Amendment 3 is a total dumpster fire, and it's just one. It's designed to really take away power from us and put it, as much of it as possible, in politicians who are getting these big checks to make sure that all this stuff is it is bad. It is bad on so many different levels, and yeah, it's no good. So yes, John, I think
Yeah.
that there's
So on those pieces, what I would say, like, folks may challenge those, but the Amendment 3 is not an unsophisticated
right.
proposal. It is nasty. It is devious, and the folks who put this together, they think that they can do all of it. They think they can take away your rights to challenge maps in court. They think they can, and they are trying to make it so judges can't fix rigged maps. They think they can make Missouri the first state to not count kids, to draw maps based on something other than like counting everyone, which is, we've talked about that. They think they can do all this stuff, but they know that they can't defend any of that now in the electoral context. And so, like, that is why, we talk about the tricks. That is why the campaign has, like, repeatedly called out those tricks. One, because it's so important, as all of us, as we're talking to our friends and neighbors in these final days, that everyone understands, like, hey, don't get duped by bullets 1 and 2. But we've also seen with thousands and thousands and thousands of conversations that when voters understand how politicians are trying to trick them, that's when the bell goes off inside. They may not have the interest or the desire or the frame of reference to really want to get into an hour-long podcast or a live stream on redistricting policy, but they know there's a reason to believe in America right now that politicians are trying to dupe you. Like, that is not a foreign concept to the people in your lives. And so, like, that is why we and that's why we would encourage you to, like, yes, if they want to have a long conversation on the details, rock and roll. But if they learn nothing else, they need to know that politicians are trying to trick them with the $5 gift change, and that what's really going on is a politician protection scheme.
Yeah. It's bad. That's the simplified version. It's just
Amendment
bad.
3 is bad.
It's bad. It's bad. Just vote no on the darn thing. Yeah. And the scary thing is this is the beginning, right? This is almost an experiment that they're doing here in Missouri, because they ain't going to stop here. Like, if this thing works out somehow for them, this is what they want to do moving in the future in so many other places. And it just, we cannot let that happen. So I know we've got some viewers who are outside of Missouri, but are interested in what's going on. That's what's happening. Like, Missouri is becoming the testing ground for so many things. And a lot of folks know me railing about dark money quite a bit, but that's happening. Like, right now, Missouri is at the forefront of so many of these battles, and this is one that we need to win. Speaking of which, and somebody commented that they love your new commercial. So good job. Good job with your new commercial.
Very good.
So I want to give you a chance, the opportunity, the wonderful moment in your political organizing career to close out the show and let folks know why this is so important, any last thoughts that you have, and certainly I'm sure you'll have the opportunity to do it, and I'm sure it's already ingrained in you, but to tell folks what to do when they go to the ballot on November 3rd.
That's right. So we're all going to be voting no on Amendment 3 because we all do better when our state government works for us and when politicians are responsive to the people back home. The ultimate goal of Amendment 3 is to have a redistricting system, a map drawing system that lets lobbyists and political operatives draw maps to protect their favorite politicians, to protect incumbents in super duper safe seats. For all the things we've been talking about the last hour, they know you don't like the fine print. They know that nobody's going to like the fine print. And so they are relying on deception and tricks to try and get this thing across the finish line. The tricks are a $5 lobbyist gift change, a $100 campaign contribution change. No one thinks those are real reforms. Those are an obvious smokescreen for what's really going on. You should know, voters should also know, that the politicians behind Amendment 3, 2 courts ruled that they broke the law with the lies that they were trying to peddle with Missouri voters. And so when politicians are trying to trick us, when they get called out in court for lies, it is on us to send a message to them that we want fair maps and we want fair redistricting. And it's on us to send them a message that we will not be duped, and we're going to vote no on Amendment 3.
Soendker Nicholson, campaign director for Clean Missouri. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. Good luck.
Thank you, Elad.
Good luck.
Thank you.
We need it. And folks, if you're watching right now, Make sure to tell a friend. You don't have to watch this whole hour-long thing. I mean, people do, Sean. Believe it or not, they actually do like to watch the whole thing. And it will be out in a podcast soon. I'm catching up on a whole bunch. I'm a little bit behind. But you can also, if you're very entrepreneurial about this, cut a scene that you like the most, folks, and just put it out there. I don't care. Just have us talk about it. There's so many folks, and Sean's one of them. I'm one of them. Michael, who I put on the screen earlier, is one of them. We're happy to talk to you about this issue. And I know we had some friends in Nevada who had me come out and are watching right now too. You know I will travel wherever it is to make sure that folks know about this. It's that important, which means all of you who are watching right now, you need to let people know it doesn't matter if they're Democrat, doesn't matter if they're Republican, doesn't matter if they just don't care about any of this stuff. In fact, that's probably better because those are the people who know how messed up the system is and how much change we need. And Amendment 3 needs to fail for those reasons. So, Sean, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for all you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, everybody, you know where to find us, and we're always on eladgross.live, so check it out, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everyone.